Greetings, wanderers. Today's topic is: are Americans just as prone to propaganda as much as we think citizens from China/Russia are? Propaganda works. That's why people do it. IRC, someone in power, many years ago said something like, "It's easier to convince someone they are not influenced by propaganda than convince them they are," or something in that style. You are not immune to propaganda, nor am I, nor is anyone. If you think you are, you already fell for it. Most Americans don't realize they're living under crazy amounts of propaganda, lol. Yes, you are. American news is pretty much unwatchable to me. As an outsider, it's ridiculously obvious. The fact that some news broadcasts have to classify themselves as entertainment to get around the fact that they're not actually factual in their stories should be the biggest red flag of all. Look up Lost Cause revisionism. This was a propaganda campaign undertaken by ex-Confederates and their descendants to convince people the American Civil War wasn't about slavery. It was quite successful too, sad to say. Wherever you live, your government is lying to you. Just because Putin is lying doesn't mean Biden is telling the whole truth and vice versa. Every single person in power is lying to you to achieve their goals. Some might be doing it for the greater good, some might be doing it to benefit themselves. They are not all equally evil. Have a healthy suspicion of everyone in power. Very true. At the same point, there's a caveat. It's good to recognize that the emphasis should be placed evenly on healthy as much as it should on suspicion. You only have to look at some of the total fucking nutters out there who have managed to convince themselves of totally unhinged things, like the lizard people/moon landings were faked/canon/flat earth types. Just having a suspicion of authority isn't enough. It has to be rational, or you become the sort of paranoid loser who will willingly inject bleach into your children's eyeballs just because a doctor told you that wasn't a good idea. Analyze the motives that people in authority might have. Don't just unthinkingly do the opposite of whatever they say. Not enough people put an emphasis on the healthy part of healthy suspicion, for my liking. Yes, and the problem is that the US is the reigning superpower, so your propaganda not only affects you, but a lot of people in the rest of the world. You know, I would also add to this that our popular movies contain loads of propaganda which we export overseas, effectively exporting our propaganda. I would normally see it as almost harmless if so much money and global influence weren't involved. American propaganda is even crazier because unlike Russians or Chinese, they have uncensored access to the internet and therefore have all the means to see through it, yet they still fall for it. The internet is where most people are exposed to propaganda. Oh, bless you. You guys literally say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning at school and are taught you are the best country in the world. Just look at your news sources, they're full of misinformation and pro-us propaganda. The fact you don't realize proves that yes, you are susceptible to propaganda, as you haven't even realized it's rife in your own country. If you don't think your country is making propaganda, that just means it's working. Oh, 100% we live with propaganda. Read some declassified CIA documents, and realize that they've never stopped functioning in that way. Not just Americans. Literally every country's citizens are prone to propaganda. That's why populists win elections. There is propaganda in the US, but it's not necessary by the government. There are a lot of competing interests trying to spin stories one way or another. One example I read last month, a 20-something Israeli soldier is described as a girl, while a 12-year-old Palestinian is described as a woman or female. Nothing is untrue, but the words used can spin a story in a certain direction. In some ways, propaganda is more pervasive in democracies because A, there are more interests, B, the people have more power, so persuasion is more important. But as for outright lying, it should be relatively rare since getting caught in a lie is very damaging, but since Trump came on the scene the game's been shaken up. The rules have changed. Sorta. There is plenty of propaganda bombarding Americans, but it is false equivalency to say it's the same situation as China or Russia. In modern Russia and China, not only does the state openly control the media, those governments also barely bother to pretend that they will vanish people who open their mouth. This creates an environment where the public not only has severely restricted access to any other points of view, the stick and carrot are right in their faces, so there's a lot of motivation to just go along with things. America certainly has large swathes of the public that just buy into certain lines, but the very fact there are different lines to buy into means all of the propaganda is somewhat weakened because there is competition that isn't centrally censored. In the US, the government is much less of a monolithic entity with one voice than in China or Russia, so it makes much less sense in America to talk about whether or not you can trust what the government says, because different parts will say very different things. Technically, Matt Gaetz is part of the government like Joe Biden. I think it's a challenge to find anything official those two would say that agreed.